Brothers and sisters, I am awash in goodwill and brimming with good cheer today at the prospect of having done with these ill-conceived questions posed by a troll who never had any interest in hearing the answers. Meanwhile, I've been mulling over and enjoying the prospect of posing some questions for Christians starting next week. Questions that will be very different in style, substance, and intent from what we've endured here. I hope you'll join me for that, especially if you are among my Christian friends. I really want to know what you think about some things. Now, on to this last batch of brain droppings from someone who should have put a lot more thought into it. Let's plow right through these, respond as warranted, and relegate the whole lot to the ash heap of human futility. Do you believe in anything supernatural? Why, no, I don't. I don't suppose you're expecting me to support that, are you? Bear with me, friends, while I draw a distinction that I think is important. I'm teaching a couple of online sections of world music this summer, and my students get daily quizzes over the material covered in the lectures I've recorded for them. Those questions include a variety of types of questions, and one of the assumptions I make about third and fourth year students at a major university is that they'll recognize that there are differences in what those questions are aimed at. For instance, there are questions that can be answered satisfactorily with a single word, questions regarding details of music that they're studying. What is the form of Victor Jara's El Aparecido? Cyclic. No explanation is called for. That answer suffices to answer the question as framed. No other answer can be correct because there's no latitude in a question of that sort. There are, on the other hand, questions with quite a lot of latitude, questions for which there is no definitive answer, in fact. And these questions may look superficially like those that can be satisfactorily answered with a single word. Who wins the argument in una ramica deruda? To answer the daughter or the mother without supporting comment simply will not do in that case, since there is no clear answer to the question. It's a question that invites a thoughtful response, a response that includes mention of the features of the music that have been examined in order to arrive at a plausible answer. With such questions, I'm not asking my students simply to declare a winner. I'm inviting them to write a little, share some of their thinking. It's distressing, by the way, to see how many of them thought such an answer would suffice, and I swear it gets worse every year. The question we're looking at here, however, is of yet a third type, simply by virtue of the fact that it is being asked specifically of atheists. Erasmus ought to know that one of the reasons atheists don't believe in God is precisely that supernatural dimension, the supernatural nature of God. To ask whether you believe in the one is practically the same as asking if you believe in the other. No, Erasmus, this atheist does not believe in anything supernatural. I do not see it as necessary to support my position, my being an atheist and all. Here's another of many obviously intentional insults that have really made it clear to me what kind of person Erasmus is. And although the thought is by no means original to me, I share it with many others who have said the same kind of thing, that if salvation means spending eternity in the company of people like Erasmus, no thanks, I'll happily roast in hell instead. Can you believe the gall of this clown? Just look at this. Let the horror wash over you. I'm not about to waste any more words on this. And then there's this. Good God. Do you have any friends or family members that are Christian or religious in some capacity? Odd way to put it. Yeah, a lot of my friends are religious in some capacity, and the majority of those are Christians, as are all of my birth family. If so, do you love them? I guess we better take a look at that word. Erasmus, you being Christian and all, you must be aware of the fact that there are 4 different Greek words in the Bible that are translated love in the English versions, and they all mean quite different things. So you must surely be aware of the fact that a simple yes or no response to your question is impossible. One of the words used in the Bible is philia, and its meaning comes pretty close to the bond I feel with my friends. So in that sense, it's a redundant application of a word. Asking me if I love my friends is like asking, are you friends with your friends? As far as my birth family is concerned, we share a genetic inheritance and a dysfunctional childhood and nothing else as far as I can tell. I feel no bond with them. On the other hand, the bond I feel with my son is deep beyond my ability to express it, and I feel something very much like that for the 3 cats who share their lives with me. Of course, I've looked ahead and I know where you're going with this, so there's no point in my lingering over this question any further. Where does love come from? You didn't expect a simple answer to this, did you? I know you have one. God. But it's just not that simple. And anyway, given the tenor of a good many of your questions, I have to wonder how you managed to talk about love without feeling a flush of shame for being so unloving, so ungracious to people you've never even met. Anyway, to attempt to answer a question that is by no means clear, the experience we call love comes from brain chemistry, from neural activity. That's where all experience comes from. Stimuli come from all around, but our eyes do not experience the landscape they survey. The brain generates that experience. The synthesis of those stimuli is the experience. Sometimes the experiences are gratifying and we call them by a range of names: joy, pleasure, happiness, love, and so on. Sometimes the experience is not gratifying and we have a large vocabulary to describe that range of experience. That's where it all comes from, Erasmus, from our brains. Now, as I said, your question is not clear because you haven't indicated which kind of love you're talking about. For all I know, you might be talking about the empathic bonds that hold societies together. This is a good time to talk about those, isn't it? Since we see those bonds breaking everywhere and plunging our society into chaos and bloodshed. Where do those empathic bonds come from? From experience across generations. In other words, inherited predisposition. The social bonds among humans are no different in kind from those of other social species. The majority of mammalian species thrive not as loners, but as members of a band, a pride, a pack, a troop, a pod, a herd, a flock, a tribe. If the species is thriving, the individuals who make it up can flourish. That flourishing takes place within community, which is held together by social bonds that can be understood as love. In other words, it's an inheritance of the evolutionary processes that sculpted us over millions of years. Is love just a bunch of chemicals reacting in your brain? Of course, there's no missing the scorn, the dismissal in Erasmus's use of the word just, and his framing otherwise brings up an image of some fizzy chemicals in a flask in the laboratory of a mad scientist. It's a way of trivializing something profound, reducing something of vast beauty and wonder to a smudge of snot. I'm glad I don't even know how to think this way. The world must look like a real waste of time to someone with an attitude like that. Do humans have free will, or is everything predetermined? This question is badly framed, but it may be possible to salvage it by adding a couple of words. Do humans have free will, or is everything they do predetermined? Now I trust it's clear, and I trust you can see why it wasn't clear at all until I fixed it. I hope Erasmus doesn't expect a simple yes or no response to this. This is one of the most intractable of philosophical questions, and philosophers have argued over it for millennia without apparently being able to converge on a solution. Which road do you want to go down, Erasmus? That of Kant, of Leibniz, of Hegel? Do you want a quick survey of phenomenology or of existentialism? Of course, I know your answer to your question, assuming you're a more or less Orthodox Christian, and from what I've seen in your questions, I have every reason to think that you are. It's your church more than any other force in the world that pushes that idea of free will, and of course, you focus it on the question of whether or not you will choose heaven or hell. But you have a simplistic worldview, and it would be frustrating and futile for me to try to discuss deep concepts with you, whose perspective apparently has no depth whatsoever. fMRI experiments seem to indicate that the answer to this question is no, that free will is an experience, and that experience, like every other experience, is constructed by our brains, in this case as a post hoc rationalization for the thing we just did. That's about all I can tell you. It does certainly seem to me at times that I have some degree of free will, that I can choose whether to grab a sandwich from Firehouse Subs or from the Fat Shack, but that's so trivial it hardly bears thinking about. When I look back over my life, on the other hand, I cannot put my finger on a single instance where I consciously chose any turn in the winding course that led to who I am. One final thing on this. Most semesters, I begin by asking my students to fill out a questionnaire with my assurance of confidence, of course. I ask them a range of questions, many of them requiring a modicum of reflection. One of the questions I ask is, what is your major? And the immediate follow-up, why did you choose that major? Do you see what I did there? Invariably, the answer begins with the word, either stated outright or implied, because. What does that word mean? What does it mean to be caused? I trust my point is made. Do animals have free will? I believe I've already covered this. I suspect Erasmus believes the answer to this question to be no, and I would agree, but not for the reason he does. I would also point out the fact he has apparently forgotten, given the distinction he's drawn here. Humans are animals, and this question applies to them as well as to my cats, who clearly have no volition. He could fix his question by adding other. Do other animals have free will? But of course he won't do that because, fundamentalist that he is, he more than likely does not believe that humans are animals. Do animals feel pain? This raises hackles, not just because it's no more an atheism-specific question than the last two I've dealt with, but because it does hark back, wittingly on Erasmus's part or not, to that horrifically inhumane 19th century practice of vivisection and the rationalization that was given for it, that those howls of obvious pain were nothing more than reflexes in the nervous system of a biological automaton with no consciousness whatsoever and incapable of suffering. It's a hideous notion. It's a notion hatched in the minds of moral monsters, the same kind of monsters who could own slaves. Yes, Erasmus, animals can most certainly and altogether obviously feel pain. Do you have an ounce of empathy in you? How can you even ask a question like this? Are you implying that atheists are so heartless that they could beat an animal with impunity or something? If so, go fornicate yourself. Do animals have souls? No, there are no souls. Vitalism was disproven in the 19th century. Time to catch up, Erasmus. And since humans are animals, the same answer applies to us. Should animals have rights? Why is this an atheism-specific question? I don't get this at all. Erasmus, would you like me to read you long passages from Peter Singer and Aldo Leopold? You can hear an eloquent case made by both those writers for the extension of rights to all other animals and even to land, forests, and rivers, to whole ecosystems. My question to you is, how broad is your mind? How big is your heart? How rich is your imagination? How deep is your understanding? Should people have rights? Curious that you posed these two questions in the opposite order from those about free will. What do you mean by should, Erasmus? Do you mean necessarily or ideally? Let's go with the latter first. Ideally, certainly, people should have rights, a broad range of them. Ideally, humans would be free to do whatever they wish without fear of legal reprisals, provided they are bringing no harm to others. What that means in actuality, which is to consider should in the sense of necessarily, is of course complicated, messy. We've tried myriad systems and never got it completely right, if at all right. Rights are most certainly human conferred. We've seen stunning corroboration of this fact right here in the divided states of America over the last few weeks, with the highest court in the land abolishing a whole manifest of rights that had been enjoyed by half the U.S. population for half a century. So don't try to argue that rights come from God. They most certainly don't, as witness daily life in the theocracy of your choice, where people have few or no rights at all. But again, why is this a question for atheists? What's your answer, Erasmus? Should people have rights? Should other animals? What kinds of rights does the blessed old leather-bound Bible confer on us, Erasmus? Are human beings animals? Well, let's see. We are indisputably multicellular organisms that must survive by ingesting other living things, processing them in a through gut that runs from a mouth at one end to an anus at the other. That right there is the definition of an animal. I've just described every arthropod, mollusk, cnidarian, bryozoan, annelid, echinoderm, and chordate. We are in that last group. So yes, we are, by definition, animals. Does all life on Earth have a common ancestor? Apparently. I'll tell you what it doesn't have, though. It doesn't have a common designer. Where is your evidence that all life on Earth has a common ancestor? In our genetic code. I just finished reading a fascinating summary of a paper written by Bill Martin and 6 Dusseldorf colleagues, published in 2016 in the journal Nature Microbiology. It's a paper proposing some alternatives in the search for LUCA, the last universal common ancestor. Martin and his team have identified 355 genes that certainly belonged to that ancestor, genes which are shared by all life today. They've indicated there must be thousands of others. That was just the number they had found at the time of publication. I'll link you to that summary in the description below. And yes, I'd say the evidence is conclusive that all life has a common ancestor, not a common designer. Do you believe that human beings came from monkeys? I could respond with a gross oversimplification that is nevertheless accurate if you let me define a few terms. To generalize, humans, which are among the modern apes, evolved from ancient apes. And those apes in turn evolved from animals that most people would probably describe as monkeys if they were to see one. When I say that I believe that, I want it understood that I'm using the verb to believe in a sense that I explained last week, that sense of to believe that is very close in meaning to that of to know, because where this question is concerned, as with all the others having to do with evolution and so forth, I've looked at the evidence. To couch it more usefully, the reason we are among the apes is that all the traits that are definitive of apes are traits that we share. And the reason that we are within the clade that includes Old World monkeys is that all the traits that are definitive of Old World monkeys are traits that we share. Like those monkeys, we have whorled cartilaginous ears, nostrils that point downward, fingerprints, and a shared dentition pattern. The step from monkeys to apes includes the loss of the tail, a less hairy condition, and much larger brains proportionate to body size. But let's take it deeper into the cladistic relatedness and therefore farther back in time. We, along with the other apes, the Old World monkeys, the New World monkeys, and lemurs and their kin, are all primates. There are features that define primates, that is, set them apart from other mammals. They include nails in place of claws or hooves, enclosed orbits, 3 different kinds of teeth, brains with posterior lobes, opposable thumbs, a pendulous penis and scrotum, and 2 pectoral mammae. I just described New World monkeys and Old World monkeys, which are quite different from the former, and apes, including humans. See how that works? Do you believe monkeys came from fish? Good God, I'm so glad I'm about done with this clown. Who frames a question about evolution that way? Well, a creationist clown who doesn't give a damn about what's true and what's not. That's who. This is Hovind-level stupid and insulting. He's not inviting a synopsis of 400 million years of vertebrate evolution with this question. He just means to make evolution look ridiculous, like Kent Hovind claiming evolution teaches that humans came from a rock. Not going to bother with this one. And there you go. He's filled his quota. What an exercise in moronic, knuckle-dragging troglodytism. Brothers and sisters, tune in next week when you'll hear me ask Christians a question or two. Until then, guard your soul. We live in a world that eats souls. Don't get excited, Erasmus. I'm not admitting anything. I'm speaking metaphorically.